If you've ever watched content that made a promise you knew couldn't realistically be delivered and it still outperformed yours, this is for you. That happened to me recently. I was working on content for my YouTube channel and a competitor popped up. And the title stood out to me immediately. Not because it was good, but because it was making a promise I knew was almost impossible to keep. I ran it through one of my assessment tools and it showed me that it wasn't that it was better, it was that we were playing two completely different games. I was posting for results and they were posting for traffic. Let's break that down. As much as I wanted to say what they were doing was wrong, the reality was they were playing by the rules of the platform. The platforms aren't necessarily focused on results. They're focused on response. They're focused on recognition. And what that person was creating was recognition content. They were making content that helped someone recognize their situation and then basically laying things out that were semantics. So where I was getting impressions in the hundreds, they were getting impressions in the thousands. And as much as I would love to be able to say, well, that doesn't seem fair, what I had to remember was who the gatekeeper was. And the gatekeeper is the platform, and the platform has its own job to do. The platform is looking for someone to be able to give people content that allows them to recognize themselves and then binge watch, trying to find all the different ways to be able to address that. So where I was focused on solving a problem, they were focused on making sure that people recognize themselves in the content. I was the person after the person. I was the person that was trying to solve a problem that they didn't know that they had yet. And that was something that stood out to me and something that I immediately had to figure out how I was going to be able to address. And it took me from focusing on doing educational content to observational education. And it's a subtle difference, but it is a difference. Where I was talking about content, it was downstream. If this is what you're struggling with, then this is how you solve this problem. What I really needed to be asking is, here's some of the things that I'm seeing. Here's the struggle. Here's the challenge. Here's the problem. Is this you? Does this sound like you? Is this something that you're experiencing? By framing it that way, it allowed me to be able to move upstream, catch people when they were going through something that they couldn't actually put their finger on. They couldn't name it. And that's what the platforms are actually rewarding people for, giving people a reason to stay on the platform and do their due diligence, to do their research, to try to figure out, okay, now that I know what it is and I can name it, how do I figure out how to be able to address it? So where I was the person after the person, I was the person that would be the content that you would find after you realized, okay, so this is what the problem is. Because the follow-up question to that is, well, how do I address it? What do I need to do? When you place yourself as the person after the person, you're leaving the audience open to whoever chooses to be that first person. Now, the reality is, it's not that they're lying, it's that they're giving you something based on semantics, best case scenarios. I've seen some people say that they can do things without an audience. I've seen people say that they can make people a certain amount of money within a certain amount of time. The catch to that is, what's your surrounding circumstances leading up to it? So when I say, is this you? I'm asking, is this something that you've experienced? Is this something that you've seen? And that's the trigger point. I don't want to be able to be the person that triggers someone and then not provide a solution. So I just naturally avoided that whole situation completely and said, I'm just going to focus on the results. But you have to understand who the gatekeeper is. And the gatekeeper is the platform. The gatekeeper is the person that you need to make that introduction to all the people that are on that platform that are looking for answers. And if you don't play by their rules, then you don't win the game. So as much as that person was making offers and saying things that I knew that they weren't necessarily going to be able to deliver on, the platform said they're playing by the rules. We set the rules, you follow the rules of engagement, and we'll reward you for it. By not following the rules, I was setting myself up for failure. So the easy conclusion isn't that quality doesn't matter anymore, but it's actually what's happening. And what's happening is it was bad timing. So timing, in some cases, can outweigh value. You can have great timing and it will outweigh how valuable that content is that someone else may put out there. Because if you're following the rules and that's what that platform presents, because it helps someone recognize who they are and it helps them start to say, well, I need to start finding more things. I need to search. We're talking about user generated content and user generated platforms. They need people on the platforms to generate the money. If I'm solving a problem, then I'm giving them a reason to research, do homework. And sometimes that homework or that research isn't on that platform. So from a business standpoint, it makes sense. What I was doing was counterproductive to what their goal was. And if my goal doesn't align with their goals, why would they promote me? So this is the question I want people to be able to think about is when you're promoting something, is it that the algorithm's to blame or is it that you're not necessarily playing by the rules of the platform? They're not lying when they say 6K in months or any of these things that they're putting out there. They're operating on semantics. They're getting people to recognize what it is that they want to be able to accomplish. Now, the how is something completely different, but the what, that's what the platform is actually rewarding. So it's important to understand what you're up against when you're creating your content. So when you create your content, it's not something where you think, well, as long as I'm giving someone the solution that they need, then I'll be rewarded for it. That's not always going to be the case. I was creating content for people who already knew they had a problem and they were thinking about the next steps. That was only going to get me to a small amount of people. And it wasn't going to allow me to be able to reach the people that were going to need something sooner. I was the person after the person that has the conversation. And that's if that person says, oh, I wish I had met you sooner. If I had met you sooner, I wouldn't have spent this much on this program or this course, or I wouldn't have invested this. I would have saved that money to be able to work with you because I see that you're going to be able to get me the results that I'm looking for. And it can take it from being a yes to a not right now or an outright no, simply because of the timing. So I want you to start thinking about it's not necessarily how good your or how valuable your content is, how good the results that you can get somebody is, because that's an offline conversation. That's a conversation that you have once you've actually had that person come in and you're on a consultation call and they're ready to be able to take action. But when they're still in the discovery phase, then you have to be further upstream. You have to be able to help someone figure out the what and put a name to it before you can actually have them start rolling something out with, okay, here's the next step that I need to be able to follow before they're ready to take action. If you don't give them the what, then they don't understand the why, and then they definitely will never get to the who. So take a look at the platforms, understand what their rules are. When you understand what their rules are, then you understand what you're up against. What I realized was by positioning myself as a problem solver, I was becoming the person that they met after things went wrong. In some cases, that meant that they didn't have the budget. That means that they were already jaded. And then it wasn't about me just solving the problem that they were having. It was also me trying to overcome the bad experiences that they had leading up to it. And when you're giving yourself the option and the actual choice of, do you want to have to fix both things or do you want to go upstream and actually have that conversation with someone and say, is this what you're going through? Because if it is, then I have a solution for it. But if you don't give them the, is this what you're going through and allow them to self-identify themselves and say, yes, this is me. And this is what I was trying to figure out how to be able to explain, but I didn't know how to be able to explain it. That's not really going to get you the results that you're looking for. And that's where people burn through budgets. They burn through their finances and their savings buying programs. They end up chasing trends. And that's where the skepticism and conversations kick in. So those conversations weren't hard because people were difficult. They were hard because I met them after the damage was done. And it really took taking a step back and running it through that assessment so that it was able to give me a brutally honest response and said, listen, it's not that your content isn't valuable. It's that you're having a conversation at the wrong time. So at this point, we're not talking about the business. We're talking about trust, fear, and exhaustion. We're talking about understanding the emotional weight of someone so overwhelmed that they don't have the bandwidth to be able to say, well, this is what it is. And this is how I'm going to solve that problem. Sometimes what you have to be able to do is remove that initial problem. And the initial problem in some cases is not knowing what to call it, not having the language for it. And when you can lay that out for someone and you can explain it in a way that makes sense, they can say, so this is what it is, and then start asking those follow-up questions. It's less about the offers and more about undoing the experiences. It's more about giving a name to something that they weren't able to name. If you're stressed, if you're overwhelmed, if you have a lot going on, you don't necessarily have time to be able to see the forest for the trees. All you can see is the thing that's right in front of you. And until that's removed, you can't see anything else. So I didn't need to show up with all the answers. I needed to show up earlier and guide. So where I went from providing instructions and walking people through step by step and saying, download this or use this, I had to start having that conversation earlier, similar to what I'm doing right now. The conversation had to be about addressing certain things, starting with conversations about you're not alone. Because when people think they're alone, they're overwhelmed. They think people wouldn't understand and that there aren't solutions out there for them. Being able to identify, okay, here's the path that you're on. Once someone realizes, okay, so this isn't just me, but you're also able to tell me what path I'm on, now I can name the path. Now I can have a better understanding of what I can expect. And that's when you can start talking about the trends, the things that happen next. And that's where you can move people further and further down the process. So if you are someone that's result driven like I am, and you are building things based on making sure that you can deliver great results and you can provide a solution, you have to provide the steps to lead up to it. I needed to be clear and be there for them before the lesson got expensive. I needed to be there before they started making the investments, before they started chasing the trends and the fancy titles that get someone to click on something, but at the end of the day isn't going to get them the results that they're looking for. So they weren't wrong. They were early. They were able to get to the people first, and they were operating on semantics. And the reality is, it's not that they can't fix some of those problems. It's just if you're basing it off of out of 10 people, they're able to get it for like one or two. That one or two is enough of a case study or customer success story to make someone that doesn't know any better believe, well, if they got it for that person, then they can get it for me. And that's where people end up running into problems. So you have to understand what the platforms incentivize. What's their main goal? Am I going with their goal or am I going against the grain? Because if you're going against the grain and you're expecting them to reward you for it, you're going to end up running into problems like I did. And I had to make that adjustment. So curiosity first content, and then no moral hierarchy. People don't want to feel like they're being judged. What they do want is for someone to be able to show them that they're not alone and that you understand. And once you can put a name to it, then it starts to make room for them to look at the other aspects, the other things that come along with it. So being early often outperforms being right. The other thing that I want you to be able to think about is you don't need to abandon value. You just need to move it up earlier. If you can help someone self-identify who they are, where they are, then it makes it easier for you to be able to have that conversation going forward. This is for all the coaches, all the people out there that are putting content out. Know they have a great product or service or offering, but they're running into issues and they're looking at competitors and people that are doing things that they feel like are not on the level of results that they can deliver. But that person is getting more content, they're getting more exposure, they're getting more of an opportunity to be able to show what they can do. And the reason that that's happening is because a lot of times we're fighting against the platform and we have to run with the platform. That's the gatekeeper. That's the person that's going to be able to set the rules. If you're playing a game of chess and you're using rules of checkers, it's not going to work. You have to be able to play the game by the rules of the platform that you're on. So recognition, orientation, resolution. First, you want to be able to get them to recognize themselves, name the problem. Then you want to help them get orientated. Okay, if this is you, if this is something that you're experiencing, then this is most likely the path that you're on. And if this is the path that you're on, here's some of the things that you can expect to see on this path. And if you're ready to be able to deal with those things, actually have a solution for that. Content as timing, not tactics. Timing is going to be able to present you to the person at the right time and start giving them the answers that they're looking for. Tactics are things that make you try something, and if it doesn't work, then you try something, and if it doesn't work, then you try something else. Timing is the thing that allows you to be able to say, where do I need to meet this person and what type of conversation do I need to have so that they can not only hear what I'm saying, they're willing to listen. So when you show up earlier, you don't just get more impressions, you get better conversations. This is something that I'm going to be teaching in more detail. I mentioned that I created an assessment to help me be able to get to this answer, and in turn led to this episode and everything else that I'm going to be covering. What I'll do is I'll actually do a walkthrough of how I created this assessment tool, and then I'll actually make it available to you. So this way you can create your own version of it or you can run with the version that I created. But I hope you found this helpful. This has been a Strategic Coaches Moment, and I will see you next time.